everybody. Welcome back to Fan2Fan Podcast. One of your hosts, Doug, here, and we are on the final leg of our RV road trip of horror across the United States. We have had quite an adventure on this trip. If you have made it with us along these many episodes, talking about everything from one of the greatest movies, Alien Abduction Incident at Lake County, to Mr. Jingles, to, of course, Jennifer's Body and Wrong Turn, we've covered the gamut of horror and what we have debated as not horror in some of these. Like the last movie we did, Close Encounters, not horror. So we just kind of shuffled that one along. But we're here in our final leg. We're going to start this off. There is no debate whatsoever when we head into Colorado that this movie is horror. And Andrew, I think we're going to start with you on this one. Let's get into it. We're talking about The Shining.
Ooh, this movie. I love this movie. This is in my top 10. I mean, there's like 100 movies in my top 10, but this is definitely within the top 10 of the top 100. Just every single part of this movie is just wonderfully, suspenseful, and the atmosphere built throughout the entire thing. The effects are phenomenal. It's like the right amount of effects. Really, just the acting. Nicholson looks completely deranged. Shelley Duvall, I think, was in reality fearing for her life because of Kubrick. It's such. We could talk about this movie for an hour, but I know Doug will yell at me if I talk about this movie for an hour. So I just want to say this is a phenomenal movie. The story itself is great. I won't hog the spotlight talking about how the differences between the book and the Stanley Kubrick telling of The Shining. But really, just I haven't read the book. I've only seen the other TV miniseries, The Shining, that King was more directly involved with in order to make sure that the story was told according to how he wanted the story told. And this movie is just it stands the test of time. It is a wonderful masterclass of horror and definitely deserves to be on the map.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. When we talk about this movie, the performances in every way, from Jack Nicholson to Shelley Duvall, even Danny, just his pure innocence and then fear. I mean, you had Scatman Crothers in this thing. I mean, it pulled everything together, and Jack was at his most Jackness. When we talk about this movie, this is what, because prior to this, we're talking 1980. Prior to this, there was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Easy Rider, Little Shop of Horrors. He had done things, and you had seen his brilliance come through. But when he did The Shining, I think it took him to another level, because Jack just was all in as an actor could be. I don't know that I've ever seen another actor commit as much as he did for this role. It was convincing. There was no performance in my mind. He was Johnny. He was that perfect character. And this is in my top 10. Again, talking about what we're doing now, this RV road trip that we've done. Okay, yeah, absolutely. I think of it as a horror, but I never did prior to this. It would never thought of it as a horror movie. This is another one that crosses genres. I think this is another one that crosses over, and a bigger audience gets to it because it's, over time. Again, Stephen King said he wasn't really happy with the production of this movie, and when they did this series, he was more in charge, more in control, and he enjoyed that a little bit better. But I personally, this is one of those movies, and you talked about the special effects. I think it holds up. I think you can watch it right now, and you're not gonna look at it and think anything is dated, except maybe the typewriter and the fact that she doesn't have a cell phone to call the cops, although they're in the mountains. Reception was probably horrible at that point. Pete, what are your thoughts on The Shining?
Well, first of all, guys, I just have to say, the fact that we've made it this far on our journey without a bathroom break, I mean, kudos to us right there. I mean, my bladder is going to jump out of my pants soon, but, TMI, but whatever. This is, we're all sharing here. But I digress. The Shining. What I don't know, what more can I say that hasn't been said about this film? I always kind of look at the angle of when I first became aware of some of these movies. And, this was one, you've got so many iconic parts to it. The all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. Here's Johnny. I mean, like the here's Johnny line. I remember cousins, other people, older people around me, like quoting that line before I ever saw the movie. And so I had it ingrained in my head that there was this, I didn't even understand the reference because I was too young to even understand that there was about Johnny Carson and the Tonight Show. Like everyone was saying it, and I would see the clip of Jack Nicholson's face in the half axe down doorway. And so that was embedded in my brain before I even saw the movie. So going in with all these like crazy expectations, when I finally was able to see it, I was probably, again, too young to really grasp everything that was going on. I understood the haunted house aspect of it, and I completely dug that. It's weird because I was never all that scared of watching this movie. And I think there's definitely some frightening parts. I mean, the walking into the one room, the twins, the bathroom scene with the old woman, all pretty terrifying stuff. But I just always just enjoyed the different kind of set pieces with this movie. And that's what always resonated with me. And it's interesting. I'm still learning things about this movie years later. I just recently found out, and it makes sense, but I didn't know it, that the whole end scene of him chasing Danny through the maze was all shot on a soundstage. Like for whatever reason, I just assumed that they had found some maze in somewhere in that was snow covered and then just shot it. But of course it was done on a soundstage, but it was lost to me. And so it was just like another little nugget that still gives back about this movie all those years later.
Bernie?
This is I don't know, Pete had it right. What do you say about this film? I mean, this is a crossover classic. It's a movie that we've talked about other movies on the road trip that are forgettable, and we've talked about movies that make it really easy to get caught up on your laundry. You pop in Leprechaun during Halloween, or it shows up on Fear Fest on AMC or on Sci-Fi Channel. You can start watching it. You can walk away. You come back. Oh, it's Jennifer Aniston. Oh, she was young. All right. And then you go back and do your laundry, do dishes, and then you finish up Leprechaun, and you're okay. The Shining merits sitting down. Like you have to make time to watch it because it does kind of suck you in. And I actually have never really been a big fan of Stanley Kubrick films. Clockwork Orange, 2001, Barry Lyndon. I actually haven't been a big fan of his catalog, but I do love The Shining because there's a, bring in my comic book roots. There is a comic book artist, and actually have his quote back here on my shelf for those that may be watching the video, but Alex Toth, who is a well-known comic book artist. And he was known for he's not known for one thing. Like Neil Adams is known for Batman. Jim Lee is known for X-Men. Alex Toth did a bunch of stuff, and he's probably best known for work on like Hanna-Barbera cartoons. But when I think about Stanley Kubrick and I think about Alex Toth, there's this really great quote about Alex Toth that he said, "I spent the first half of my career figuring out what to put into my work, and the second half of my career figuring out what to take out." And he figured out that there's a certain simplicity that's not simple, that as a draftsman, you start realizing that you can create a lot with shadows, with lines, and not necessarily the number of lines. And when I do think about Stanley Kubrick as a director, having those movies under his belt, movies that, again, I do not appreciate, but movies that I understand probably helped him hone the craft of directing. The Shining is a really simple movie. I mean, there is not a big cast. It's a really good high concept, and it's a simple movie that is not simply executed because there are layers. Not too long ago, I saw that documentary, The Room 237, and Pete, you talk about finding out tidbits and trivia about this movie. Now I saw that documentary. I had to watch The Shining again because I felt like I'd never seen the movie. Like, how did I miss all of this? There's so much subtext and psychology and just really masterclass working and directing and acting. And it is one of those movies that, Andrew, like you mentioned, it's in your top 10. I'd be interested to see, because of your horror pedigree, is this in your top 10 all films or in your top 10 of horror films? Because I'm sure even like with Doug, you're not necessarily the horror collector fan that Andrew or Pete or I may be, but you mentioned it's in your top 10 too. So I'm interested, Andrew, is this in your top 10 all time?
Well, I don't have an other list. It's just the top 10 horror film. I think there might be like one comedy that escaped in there. But yeah, no, this is top 10 all time. I mean, really, there's definitely some more squeamish parts that, someone that really just hates horror films or hates, really depictions of violence or gore will probably be uneasy with it. But yeah, I mean, I agree with, Doug. It's very approachable of a film, to the point where it can be like one of those gateway films to the horror genre for someone.
Yeah, and we talk about this movie and we talk about its effect on the audience and how I think you put it in now and you can still get that same effect. The movie Ready Player One, if you guys have seen it, had that amazing scene with the Shining set. And my son, my youngest, he will not watch that scene in Ready Player One because it's so damn scary, because of all the gore and the blood, and it absolutely grabbed that feel of the original Shining, and I love that Spielberg was able to take that and plug it into Ready Player One and still give us that amazing feel of horror and fear, just in a fun Ready Player One movie.
Real quick, do any of you know who was playing Jack Torrance in that scene? I didn't realize it at the time. I found out later in Ready Player One.
No, who was it?
Henry Thomas from
No
E.T.
way.
Yeah.
Very cool.
a
Spielberg alum.
I think that just shows, Doug, the power of this hotel. The fact that Spielberg was able to throw it into his movie, and immediately, like, it comes with all of this baggage. For those of us that are familiar with the movie and have seen it, versus maybe, again, someone like your son, your younger son, who may not have seen The Shining and is not familiar with the twins or the labyrinth or all of this other stuff, but he still somehow, has some unease about this hotel because of everything's associated with The Shining. We're watching it and being like, oh, wow, it's the hotel. And, talking about an RV road trip, this has to be, if you're going across the US to the mall in Dawn of the Dead or the stairs in The Exorcist, this has to be, the hotel has to be a destination for any horror fan. Have you guys gone to this hotel or known the people that have gone there? Because it just seems like a really cool destination.
No.
I've known people that have wanted to go, but I don't believe I've talked to anyone that has actually gone there.
Yeah, same here. It's definitely on my list for sure. And every now and then I do venture out to Colorado. I just need to actually go.
I would imagine that, like, when my wife and I have traveled to different places, Nashville, Traverse City, Michigan, one of the things that she's kind enough to go with me on this, but I'll always ask if she's game to go on a ghost walking tour with me. And I did this because when I first started taking like ghost walking tours in the Chicagoland area, you realize that it's like 80% history and 20% ghost stories. And even those ghost stories are rooted very much in the history of that region. And I think there's probably like what do they call it? An armchair quarterback. Like I'm like an armchair historian, where I do like to hear the history of specific areas and how that, has stood the test of time. So in traveling to places, doing a ghost walking tour, as cheesy as it may sound, I actually get to hear a little bit about the legends, the mythology of the area. And I would imagine that the folks who operate the Shining Hotel probably have to have outings that are almost made for people like us, where they do have, a typewriter somewhere where you can type, or actresses that they hired to be the twins, or some random kid that just goes on the big wheel driving around, or the carpeting, that it matches the actual pattern of the carpeting in the hotel. And I'll just throw this again, another comic book reference. So in the comic book that I made, it's called Midnight Mystery, and it's got detectives and like kind of like Kolchak the Night Stalker. There's a scene where I used the pattern of the rug as wallpaper in one of the scenes. And I did it for the same reason that Spielberg uses the hotel, because I had so many people reach out to me and say, oh my God, that was so cool how you used the wallpaper, because I wanted to create the sort of meta layer to it, where people would bring in the Shining and something certainly better than I could ever do, but create a little bit more, gravitas to the scene, because they're like, oh, that's cool, The Shining, and how you brought that in, and it's kind of like a scene where you're talking about a guy who's gone mad, and that's what happened in The Shining. That was really cool. It just shows you the power that Stanley Kubrick was able to how much power he possessed in just making the great decisions that have become so popular and have stood the test of time.
Absolutely. All right, so that's that's one of the biggies on the trip. That's one of the stops that we all were waiting for with The Shining.
Real quick.
Go ahead.
Sorry, before we leave the state, I was curious if anyone saw Doctor Sleep and like a quick summary of what you thought of that, as coming so late after The Shining and living in that same world.
So Andrew, we're going to go to you on this one.
I thought Dr. Sleep was really cool because I expected, something to be, follow up to the exact feel of The Shining, and it wasn't. And again, like, I've not done the service of reading the books for them, but to have Dr. Sleep take, I feel like it's been direction that Stephen King has had in other stories of his, where there's, basically a war of factions going on with these supernatural elements, and to really apply that to these wonderful set pieces that you have for The Shining, these established locations, these established, the universe that's created with it. I felt like it was a good, it wasn't to me a horror movie, but it was like a really cool, like, suspenseful action movie that had these great supernatural elements to it. I thought it was a very refreshing follow-up that definitely bucked my expectations.
All right, thank you for that synopsis. So let's keep on cruising, and we're gonna keep heading south. We're heading to New Mexico, and all right, you ready? I'm gonna connect the two. I'm gonna connect The Shining and the next movie by way of actors. So you got Jack Nicholson, who starred in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and in this next movie, you had one of his co-stars, one of my favorite oddball character actors that probably says 3 words in all of his movies collectively, Michael Berryman. He played Pluto in The Hills Have Eyes, the original from 1977. So when we talk about The Hills Have Eyes, I mean, he's one of those odd character actors. He's got the bald head, a little bit misshapen, was also, and it's funny because it's not credited on his Rotten Tomatoes, but it is on his IMDb, was one of the badass bikers in Weird Science, one of my favorite 80s movies. He's one of those character actors that just pop up in everything. And that's literally my connection to The Hills Have Eyes, because I'm such a fan of Michael Berryman as an actor, because I think he's so unique. So Pete, let's start with you on this one. The Hills Have Eyes. Talk to me about this.
Well, Michael Berryman also starred in Motley Crue's Smoking in the Boys Room video.
Coincidentally, also not credited on his Rotten Tomatoes page.
That's an omission that should be rectified. Yeah, this is another one. I saw it at some point. I can't remember exactly when. This was another one of those, I think, my cousins had seen before me. And so its reputation kind of preceded it a little bit, because it had, again, family living out in the middle of nowhere, kind of maybe cannibals, kind of preying on, unsuspecting people that happen to break down in the middle of nowhere. So I like the concept of it, but I'm probably not the best person to speak about it. I remember enjoying it, but it was a long time ago. So I would need to revisit it to have more of an opinion. So I have failed.
Thank you, Pete, for that in-depth look at the 1977 Wes Craven classic, The Hills Have Eyes. Moving on, Mr. Bernie, let's go for take 2.
I don't know. This might be more of the same. So sorry, Doug. I'm a horror fan.
Andrew, get ready.
Andrew, get ready. Definitely. I'm a horror fan. I know this movie, Wes Craven. What is it, like 1970 something? It is fall, like Pete said, it falls in line with some of the other movies we've talked about in Wrong Turn and Deliverance, where you do have this sort of cannibalistic backwoods family that's, essentially, preying on these poor stranded vacationers. it has something that we talked about in the last episode, that grittiness, that grindhouse feel of movies like Sam Peckinpah and Stray Dogs, those movies of the early 70s into the late 70s. So it feels, in line with that, kind of like that, really, because I want to say at some point in the movie, having seen it some time ago, I want to say they allude to the fact that these folks may be disfigured, and Berryman specifically, due to some sort of like atomic testing, that there's something involved with that. So, this is a movie that plays around with the slasher tropes that Wes Craven would kind of figure out later in Nightmare on Elm Street a few years later, but feels more in line with I Spit on Your Grave in his first filmography, where he is making these movies that feel a little bit more guerrilla, a little bit gritty, and are more about mood and tone and atmosphere than anything else. So Andrew, all yours. I tried to stretch out my thoughts on The Hills Have Eyes as much as possible. Again, another movie that is arguably a Wes Craven classic, not as much as Nightmare on Elm Street, but a movie I think you're going to be more familiar with than I am right now, for sure.
Well, this might come as a surprise for all of you, but I have not seen in its entirety the original. I've only seen the remake, which I think the remake is still, a very terrific movie, but I can't speak to the original.
Now, let me ask you, Andrew, that since we've talked about it in previous episodes, is the remake in the same vein as all the other Platinum Dunes type reboots that, the Nightmare on Elm Street, the new Friday the 13th, where they have a little bit of that like CW polish? Because I would imagine, from what I remember seeing the trailer for the reboot, it suffered from some of that.
There was a little bit of polish. It doesn't have that, like I Spit on Your Grave. It doesn't have that kind of like, raw, gritty feel to it. Although like it feels kind of like in a similar vein of Jeepers Creepers, where it's not necessarily, a very standout movie, but for what it's trying to do, I think it does it really well. The relationships that are built inside the movie kind of help, establish the characters as like real people. There's this dynamic. I'm not exactly sure what the dynamics are in the original, but there's this very masculine father going on a road trip with his family, and one of the main protagonists is a son-in-law or about to be son-in-law that is trying to like impress him, and is failing to do so. And just like the family dynamics that are kind of shaped in there, you start to grow close to this family, and they really start picking them off pretty gruesomely, pretty quick, and then it gets to this kind of like that final girl redemption kind of switch, where there's finally the shift of power and the power dynamic between the villains and the victims, where the victims start to are able to finally push back the villains through violence. It still has the explanation for the reason why this family is like mutated and cannibalistic is from nuclear testing. That's still a really major thread through it all. So it could just be really leaning heavily on the source material in order to do so. But I think it is a very effective horror movie. It's really good. Not as strong as the sequel to the remake, The Hills Have Eyes 2, which has some really graphic scenes in it, but it feels like it's being graphic for graphic's sake.
I gotta say though, I think they missed an opportunity with the reboots, and not putting Michael Berryman in to reprise his role of Pluto. I think that would have been great. The guy's still going, he's still kicking, he's still doing horror movies. So I think they missed the boat on that. So.
Checked.
All right, and we're going to get back to Wes Craven a little bit later on, because he shows his head back again. but I think we're going to be traveling again to probably one of the horror classics, one of the tent poles from one of the originators of the genre, of the world of suspense. Going to Arizona now. We're getting close, guys. We're getting close to the end of this. This road trip has been fantastic, but it wouldn't be any type of an RV trip across the United States of horror if we didn't talk about Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. So yeah, it's funny. I do classify this as horror because you got the slasher impact, you got the fear, you got the creepy hotel. I think it fits all of those categories, even though I never really thought of it that way. Going through this experience with you guys, I absolutely will put it into that category now. We'll start with Andrew on this one. Talk to me about the classic 1960 Psycho.
I mean, it really is the godfather of, or grandfather of, this kind of slasher horror. Hitchcock was a master of the suspense. All of his movies really are, ahead of their time, especially when you start comparing it, with his peers. Psycho is it's such an atypical story too, especially for when it came out, because and Bernie referenced this before earlier in the trip. You start with the lead character that you're getting the attachments, the emotional attachments that you gain, that you give to these lead characters as you start the movie, and then the floor shifts on you about 15-20 minutes in, and it completely changes the way that your expectations for the rest of the movie. It's such a stellar movie that when they rebooted it, it was shot for shot remake. They didn't try to do one thing to mess with this movie, and I think that's a testament when you can get Hollywood to not mess up a remake by just keeping everything exactly the same. I think that shows you how hollowed this movie is.
Bernie, give me your thoughts on the world that is Psycho.
It's Hitchcock. It's a classic. It's hard to imagine what Hitchcock's life must have been in the late 50s, because he makes Psycho in 60. He makes North by Northwest in 1959. And a year or so before that, he makes Vertigo. Think about those three movies alone are a career in most directors' lives. And I discovered Hitchcock in a film class in college, and didn't know the impression that he had on thrillers and filmmaking and cinema, as an art form, how big of an impression he had on that. And to think about what he did with Psycho, like Andrew, you mentioned, it is the godfather of slasher films. It's the one that starts it all. And to come to make such a big impression after, I've seen Lifeboat and the 39 Steps, and those are those early BBC movies that were, I would imagine, a byproduct of World War II, where there is a lot of this, or even pre-World War II, the espionage, the upheaval in Europe, the things that that he's dealing with. But then to have something in Psycho that, again, The Shining, it's kind of a simple premise. A sister is just trying to find her other sister, and then this terrible thing happens, but it's done so effectively. And it's in TV, I've always heard it referred to as submarine episodes, where they'll take a show, and in that one they'll put maybe the lead actors in a room, and they'll make it more of a dialogue play where they just go back and forth, because the idea is that they're trying to save production costs for maybe a season finale, so they're trying to spend less money on one episode. So you put a bunch of actors in one room and you let them act, and it doesn't cost you much. That's when you think of production values of movies like Vertigo, that just Vertigo just looks beautiful, or North by Northwest, that does have some of the time amazing effects, but between its casting and the Mount Rushmore scene and just some of the cinematography is really impressive to look at. To then something like Psycho, that one is done in black and white, which is just that much more effective. But it's very constrained. And at that point, we're talking about a master class director who knew exactly what he was doing and how he was going to accomplish everything in a very, I want to say simple again, but in a very subdued but very powerful way of doing it. I don't know. Psycho is just, what do you say about Psycho? It's just amazing.
I mean, you got to think of it. He had almost a 40-year career leading up to this. This was one of his last movies. I mean, it's not like he fell off the map. He did The Birds and Marnie after it. So it's not as if he just, Psycho was the end and he just fell off the plot. But this was at the end of his career almost. And you think of the actors that he put in this. Anthony Perkins, again, somebody who had a career leading up to Psycho. He was a TV star. He had been in a bunch of movies. And this character became so identifiable that it broke his career. He became one of those actors that was completely pigeonholed. He was the William Shatner of horror movies, where he couldn't play anything else except that character. Although he tried to break out a little bit, but everybody just looked at him as Norman. So I think that goes to the excellence of this movie, is that that's the only person you can see in that role. Even in the remake, I get it, but Anthony Perkins he personified that creepiness, that the elevator doesn't go all the way up. Just that obsession aspect, he was broken, and you felt that. You could see it in his eyes that he just was not all there throughout that movie, that he was just a broken human, and it didn't work right. And this is one of those movies that it is a masterclass in directing, in acting, in writing, in suspense. It is again, I'll throw the label out there. It's one of those perfect movies, at least in my humble opinion. Andrew, what are you thinking on this little movie? Did we already talk to Andrew about this?
Yeah, we did talk to him.
You go again.
I did want to throw in something that I think, Andrew, I think that you'll come in here. So this is the second film in our road trip that has a TV series that spawned from it. And interesting to put Psycho and Evil Dead in the same room. But Pete, Andrew, you guys mentioned you guys are a big fan of the Evil Dead series, TV series. Mm-hmm. And I've heard a lot of good things about Bates Motel. So I'm wondering, Andrew, have you seen Bates Motel? Because it seems like a movie that, Doug, with everything you were talking about with the establishment of Anthony Perkins' character, there was enough there that people wanted to find out more about this guy and about his mother and how did they get to this place. Like, you wanted to unearth all the trauma, the psychology behind that. So then you get Bates Motel.
Yeah, I haven't seen Bates Motel. And as we discussed before, I'm a big fan of some of these TV retellings, or like Evil Dead's TV show is bringing it into the modern age, from Army of Darkness. But like the Exorcist TV show, I'm a big fan of. There's a few really solid horror TV shows that are coming out in the past like 4 or 5 years. Evil's another one, although it's not based on anything. But no, I haven't seen Bates Motel. I'll have to add that to the ever-growing list.
All right, Pete, give us your thoughts here.
I'll try and wrap it up real quick because again, this movie's been dissected and covered so much. I think the thing that I love about it is the misdirection. Again, like tropes are great and tropes are good and tropes are very comforting in movies, but to kind of go into something, I try to put myself in in the minds of an audience kind of seeing this for the first time, and just kind of how you're expecting something, and then once the shower scene happens, it basically just it just takes all the rules and just erases everything, and from that point you don't know anything can happen. And it's got to be a very powerful thing as a director to kind of know you've got an audience like that, because they don't know where it's going to go from there, because you've completely fucked with their heads 20 minutes into a movie. And I think that's just that's part of the brilliance. The other thing, Bernie, you mentioned The Birds, which is another one of my favorite Alfred Hitchcock movies, and I think a similarity there is that movie also starts off very deliberately kind of slow. It just kind of eases you into what's happening. Tippi Hedren's in San Francisco and she runs into Rod Taylor, and just thinking about buying some, it's very, it's almost like a different movie than what it becomes. And you're just kind of sucked into like, okay, what's happening here? But then once that hits, once he strikes that chord and everything goes crazy, then it's like, oh, okay. It's like that ability to grab you, because it lulls you into that false sense of, security of like, you're watching something, we'll see how this goes. And he just kind of grabs you by the shirt and like, nope, here we go now. So those are really the two aspects that have always really endeared me with Psycho. And the funny thing is, I think I saw Psycho 2 before I saw the original. But of course I knew most of the beats of the original. I actually think Psycho 2, I mean, for what it was, I thought it was pretty effective too. I mean, it's an interesting little film to, again, come back so many years later. And Doug, as you were saying, Anthony Perkins typecast very much at that point. His role in The Black Hole notwithstanding.
Come on, that was a classic of our generation. I love The Black Hole.
But yeah, I mean, I think coming back that many years later and still owning that role and bringing some sympathy and empathy to a character, takes an immense amount of skill that he clearly had.
So, Pete, did you see Psycho 3?
I think I did. Was that like Jeff Fahey was in that one? He was like running the Bates Motel.
Perkins was in it as well.
Yes, yeah. But yeah, I'm pretty sure I did. I don't remember part 3 too much though.
And then Psycho 4, the beginning.
That was when he calls into the radio station. I think that's like the whole movie is him talking to a radio host, right? And like confessing his madness.
Yeah, again, he just, Anthony Perkins was such a great actor, and he delivered in everything he did. It's just, after Psycho, that's all you saw him as. It was really hard for him to break that mold that was formed around him from being Norman, because it was such a perfect role, such a perfect character. All right, so
I have a quick question for the group. Pete reminded me, how much does everyone metagame the horror movies when you see it? Like trying to figure out where they're going to take it, where's the twist, who's going to get killed next? Because I always kind of assumed that it was a little personality quirk of mine, but to hear Pete talk about, the twist, the beginning of the lead getting murdered right away, and that standing out makes me think that, maybe I'm not alone.
Luckily, I am an open and empty mind, and I go into every movie like a wide-eyed puppy. So I never want to guess. Like, I don't read spoilers. I try not to watch trailers of movies, especially things that I love. If we, ever get into the world of Star Wars and stuff like that, I loved all of them because I went in with zero expectations. So I try to never, as you say, meta think and meta dissect a movie as it's going forward. But inevitably, there are absolutely some of those movies which 30 seconds in, I can write the whole entire thing because it's just so bad. But that's, I think, a whole different thing. What about you guys, Bernie, Pete?
Yeah, I'm kind of with you, Doug. If it's a good movie and I'm invested in what's happening, I like to be like, okay, let me see where this is going to take me without trying to think too much and try to figure too much out. Because then I feel, me personally, I'll lose bits and pieces that I feel like I should be paying attention to, not to solve like a mystery or something like that, but just, I want to experience, that vision, and the less I'm thinking about, oh, what, is maybe subconsciously you'd be like, this is a misdirection, or maybe this is a red herring. Let's see where this goes. But I'm much more in the camp of like, okay, just let it unfold and let me just absorb it rather than thinking through.
Like I would never watch a movie and think that because there's a megaphone in it and it doesn't fit the right time period that it ruins the movie for me. But
but I did call The Sixth Sense. I landed that one. I nailed it. I was so proud of myself when I walked out of the theater.
I think very nice.
Andrew, I think this is why you and I could never go to the theater at the same time, because I would be exactly with you. I would be the person that would say, all right, plot point 3 should be coming up soon. So there should be some sort of an argument between the main characters that causes them to separate. And this is where this one person is going to get killed, which is going to motivate the main character to get, some sort of a vengeance or something. So, Doug, I can see you shaking your head. I am
you and
not
Andrew, You and Andrew would be perfect at the movies together. If I went to the movies with you, I would be strangling you.
That
It's like, oh,
fair.
there hasn't been any orchestra music for like a minute. There's a jump scare just like right around the corner.
Yeah, because I think
that's why.
that's true. I do think about story, but I think that's something that we've talked about this in other movies. Like you see enough of these, just let's stick to the horror genre. You start kind of, it's like a boxer. The directors are telegraphing their punches, and you can start saying, well, this is the scene where someone is going to die, and the music cues are not there. So the director, you can almost see them in the editing room saying, all right, well, we're going to keep this quiet, and we're going to have some establishing shots to create some like pause before the real jump scare happens. So I don't know, maybe that by that argument, Andrew, you and I would be the perfect person because we wouldn't annoy anyone else. You and I would just be like, right, this is going to happen, right, and everyone would just be shushing us.
Oh yeah, Bernie, I think you're right. I think we're perfect.
Okay, done.
No, it's, and again, now on my second and third and fourth viewing of a movie, I watch a movie different every time. I try to dissect it in different ways. I always try to catch things, and I look at the screen differently. And on my 10th and 12th time watching a movie, I'm literally watching the right corner of the movie screen, just seeing what I can see up there, things that I didn't catch. And I'll do that on movies that just get me. But I always go into that first one, always open and just in it for the experience, whatever it is that's in front of me, good, bad, or ugly.
Definitely, but like the fifth time that I see something, when the twist happens, then I'm like, all right, let me figure out where this is going. I think I can predict it.
I think Pete's more of an empty vessel than I am. All right.
I say just to wrap up Psycho a little bit here, and give Andrew a nod as one of our good hosts here. This is one of the few movies with multiple sequels that doesn't go into space.
Not yet.
Not yet.
All right, so we're not going to space, but we're heading north.
Space go
to Utah, and this definitely horror, but it's one of those one and dones. It's a standalone by the director. Essentially, his only movie that he directed. He directed one previously, but really a forgettable thing. We're talking Herc Harvey and Carnival of Souls from 1962. So this is right after Psycho, kind of fills in that horror genre that people are clamoring for. Anybody got anything on Carnival of Souls? Bernie, let's start with you on this one.
I know it's public domain, and Andrew, when we were talking about Night of the Living Dead, you'd mentioned it was Night of the Living Dead in public domain. So this must be the only other one on this specific map that we're using as our roadmap that's public domain. I've only seen pieces of this movie, and I think in the pieces that I've seen and the reviews that I've watched about it, again, like I've watched more reviews about this film than I've seen the actual film. And from everything I can gather, this movie is a mess. Like it's just completely twisted and weird and not necessarily sensical in any way. Some of the trailers I've seen for it feel like it's very much inspired by that Giallo, the Italian type of filmmaking, where there is a lot of how things feel than necessarily showing things, that there's that level of suspense that you saw in Dario Argento, like Suspiria, like things like that. This feels like a movie that was inspired by European sensibilities in horror films, because again, not having seen it, it looks weird. It looks like a movie that is so perfect to be riffed by Mystery Science Theater. It feels like it would be that kind of movie, but it's just that weird that they didn't, because it's a little too non-linear to joke about.
What do you got on Carnival of Souls? Anything?
Oh, not much at all. I think the only reference I have to Carnival of Souls was when I was younger, I used to read, wasn't Fangoria, but I used to get books out of the library about horror because I was slightly obsessed as a younger child. And I definitely recall either seeing the film poster for this, or it was definitely referenced in one of those books. But beyond that, I don't even recall if there was much to the plot, or, I just remember the name rang a bell for me. but that's my tidbit.
We can move on to Andrew for this one. Andrew?
Well, this one, I'm also probably going to disappoint a little bit. I'm 2/3 of the way through, done for
I don't
homework.
think anybody would be disappointed, Andrew.
I appreciated the trailer. I appreciate that white face. I think the director played this white face ghoul or apparition that's haunting the lead character. But I had to stop because it's taking a lot of time and it's really antiquated for a film. I don't want to be that person that dodges an older film for being an older film. Things were how they were, but
well, we just talked about Psycho, and we can put Psycho in right now, and it's going to hold up. So
and I think that's why Psycho, is the bar where you measure things against. I definitely, there's limitations when you are going through this medium storytelling, and you build upon the excellent work by others that come before you, and you get inspired by them. You learn new techniques on how to convey a storyline. With movies around this time, it's very laid out story. Narration is usually not something that's too far behind for it because they're not using the other parts. They're not using sound to paint atmosphere. They're not using visuals to try to compress the information that you need as the backstory. They take their time, and it does feel drawn out when you revisit it. And it's not fair for Carnival of Souls to say, I got too tired of watching this woman try to play the organ to actually watch it all the way through. Because for the small things that I saw, the small effects that I saw for a very small budget film, they were cool.
And it does take place in an amusement park, right?
It does, a carnival
of
souls.
Okay, because the reason I mentioned that is this is a movie that I feel like has people know about it. Probably more people know about it than people that have seen it. Because I remember playing the Silent Hill games when those first came out, and I want to say in Silent Hill 1 or 2 there was a scene in an amusement park, and Pete talking about magazines. I remember Game Pro and all of those video gaming magazines that I was a big fan of. And one of the directors or concept designers talking about being inspired by the movie Carnival of Souls. So as a horror fan, I thought, oh, this must be cool. And all the things are there. Like carnivals can be scary, and the idea of clowns and being lost. And I want to say, Andrew, and you can correct me on this, does it have to do something with her descent through madness, or something about her potentially being dead, and this is supposed to be her moving on to the other side? Is it something like that? Because that's the feels, or I feel like that's what I've heard is the premise.
Well, Bernie, I've only gone through 2/3 of the movie, so I'll let you know next time. But yeah, it does seem like she's either in purgatory or going mad from her near-death experience at the front of it. And I definitely can see the ingredients of some of the key parts of the film that I've seen so far be used in other things. It is one of those definitely an inspirational movie, as even if it can't really stand up on its own anymore.
I think you guys have given Carnival of Souls its just and due time. I think we've given it enough. You guys have almost been apologetic about it. So
you guys have been this tall and have been able to ride.
Not quite able to hit that ride, yeah. So we're going to move north to Idaho, and Peter Fonda directed horror film called Idaho Transfer. I see from Pete's expression he is very excited to jump off with this one. Go ahead, Pete. What you got?
Yeah. I've never heard of this one before, but I love the title. I absolutely love the title. I feel like this is like opening scene. You've got some guy getting off the bus somewhere in Boise, and showing up at the local diner. Server behind the counter, I haven't seen you in town before. What's your story? Well, I just got in from 10 Killer Lake. You know, I asked for the Idaho transfer, and then we're off and running. And that's
There
as
you
far
go.
as I
That's-
got with my story pitch.
That was good. I think that's about as much as we're going to get from everybody. I mean, it has Keith Carradine in it, for goodness sake.
And it was directed by Peter Fonda.
It
Just saying.
was. Bernie, come on, Bernie, give us everything you got on Idaho.
The most I can give you is the fact that I saw the trailer and like a 5-minute YouTube review on this because I couldn't find it anywhere to stream. Like Pete, I thought this felt like some sort of noir movie from the 50s about some guy who takes the Idaho transfer on a bus somewhere in Boise, but turns out it's not. And before I go into this, Andrew, have you seen this film?
I have not, nor have I read about it.
Okay, so I'm assuming, Andrew, that you're probably in the crowd of folks that would think like Pete, that this is something about some bus trip or something like that, right?
No, it's obviously a train film.
Okay,
It's a train film. So train, what did you think it was? What did you think this was about?
I thought it was exactly that. Some sort of guy on the lam takes the bus, ends up, he's trying to get away from the law, and he ends up getting the Idaho transfer where no one will find him. And maybe he ends up befriending like a young ingenue that works at the bus depot. She hides him from maybe the U.S. Marshal that's going after him. Feels like a perfect role played by like a younger Robert Mitchum, where, he had those sort of that squared chin, and you could kind of feel that, he would be a little empathetic to a young girl in a small town, and she's trying to hide him. That's what I thought the film was. No.
Should I read the very long synopsis of this movie?
By all means, please do, because after I saw the trailer for this, completely threw apart any expectations I thought for this film.
All right, here we go. 4 teenagers are sent to ecologically devastated 2044 in order to build a new civilization.
Yep, it's about time travel and like this government bunker where they have figured out time travel, except time travel can only be done by younger people, like in their 20s, because time travel has a devastating effect on your kidneys. Yes, this is the movie.
Well,
so
that makes sense.
Yep. So these 4 kids end up getting shot into the far-flung future, and the idea is that there's like, it seems like these sort of Soylent Green elements, because there's an issue with like class, and they end up getting stuck there, and then they realize that there's a real mystery to how people survive, how they eat, how they have fuel in their cars. And again, this was from the trailer, just little elements like this, nothing at all like what you would think this movie's about. So forget the whole whether this is horror or not. Like, what is this?
So the future is messed up, so they send the kids further into the future.
Right. Yeah, you got it.
Are these 4 teenagers named Fred, Daphne, Thelma, and Shaggy by any chance?
Who's next?
That would make more sense, Pete.
And come across a talking dog, talking Great Dane in the future.
And the fact that it's directed by Peter Fonda, I think he directed a few films. I'm wondering if this is just a case of an actor who gets the directing bug and happens to get a script in front of him, or maybe this was his passion project. Who knows? I don't want to, badmouth his directorial efforts here, but man, this movie sounds weird, and it doesn't sound like anything we would have thought it was, and it's 100% worth moving on from.
Well, to be fair, you're only a roll of aluminum foil away from making a time machine in any movie. So
this is pretty true. Time machine and a fork.
I'm guessing that with Peter Fonda, cocaine was also involved in the making of this picture.
Allegedly.
I can't prove anything. Yes, allegedly.
Easy Rider was a mere 4 years prior to this. So he was probably still in that mindset when he conceived of this, dystopian future where we have to send young people because we're going to screw up their intestines.
It's kidneys, Doug. Kidneys. A little respect for this movie.
Kidney. I apologize, Mr. Fonda.
We will be back with our next episode with the United States road trip of horror movies. Again, my name is Doug Ziegler, one of your hosts for Fan2Fan Podcast. And on behalf of Bernie Gonzalez and this week's guest host, Andrew Murray, thank you so much for joining us on Fan2Fan.